back.
I do.
And I see you into the building, and I'm like, uh-oh.
Uh-oh, if Tom's here, there's going to be big news coming. So
Glad you're here. Let's get to it. A short time ago, you watched it here live on Fox. President Trump revealing Ambassador Haley informed him 6 months ago of her intentions to resign from her position at the United Nations. The president also saying the ambassador will be staying on through the job through the end of the year, and he thanked her for her service.
She's done an incredible job. She's a fantastic person, very importantly, but she also is somebody that gets it. We're all happy for you in one way, but we hate to lose. Hopefully you'll be coming back at some point.
It has been an honor of a lifetime. I said I am such a lucky girl to have been able to lead the state that raised me and to serve a country I love so very much.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live with more. John?
Well, to say that we were surprised would be an understatement. I mean, nobody had any inkling, Harris, that this was going to happen. Nikki Haley didn't tell the people that work for her until this morning what was going on, and a lot of people here who work at the White House were kind of blindsided by this as well. But it all seemed to be very carefully orchestrated. The president talked about this idea of when you do it in a written statement, when you say somebody's leaving, people go, whoa, what's behind that? What's really going on here? So the president wanted to take a moment to sit down with Ambassador Haley in the Oval Office and very calmly explain what was going on and give her a big White House send-off. Here's part of what the president said.
At the end of the year, Nikki will be leaving and will be in constant touch. I know that. Whenever you have any ideas, you can call me because you know all the players. And that was really the thing I think she did best at the United Nations. She got to know the players. She got to know China, Russia, India. She knows everybody on a very first-name basis, and they like her. Except for maybe a couple, which is normal. They can't all like you, but they do. They really like her, and I think maybe more importantly, they respect her.
Now, the last 8 years for Nikki Haley have been a rather intense time. She ticked off her time as South Carolina governor for 6 years, during which there was a big hurricane. There was a 1,000-year flood that happened there. There was the shooting at the church in Charleston, South Carolina, all of which she had to deal with as governor. And then she went right from that into being the United Nations ambassador, which is certainly like jumping from the frying pan directly into the fire, only you're dealing with international as opposed to just a single state. She also listed off a series of accomplishments that she said the United States has completed during her time as United Nations ambassador. So I put the question to her in the Oval Office. I was fortunate enough to be the television pool correspondent during that little time there with the president, Nikki Haley. I said, well, given all of the things that you just listed, why would you want to leave that behind? Listen to what she said.
I'm a believer in term limits. I think you have to be selfless enough to know when you step aside and allow someone else to do the job. So thank you, Mr. President. It's been an honor of a lifetime. And I will say this, for all of you that are going to ask about 2020, no, I'm not running for 2020. I can promise you what I'll be doing is campaigning for this one.
Nobody asked her the question, but she volunteered the answer. I'm not running for 2020. She'll be supporting President Trump. The president said that he's got a number of people in mind to potentially succeed Nikki Haley as UN ambassador. He'll probably make an announcement sometime within 3 to 4 weeks. I've checked with a number of people here at the White House. The only name that's kind of floating around at this point is that of the current ambassador to Germany, Rick Grinnell, who'll be familiar to people who watch Fox News because he was a contributor to Fox for an awfully long time. He has a deep history at the United Nations. He was the UN spokesperson there during the Negroponte days back in the Bush administration in the run-up to the war to Iraq. So he's got deep experience at the United Nations. He was one of the names under consideration during the transition to be UN ambassador. The president picked Nikki Haley, so maybe this time around it's Ambassador Grinnell's turn. Well, we don't know, but we'll find out sometime in the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Well, and the president said, John, and I don't know that we know the texture of this yet, that there's a big announcement at the rally tonight. Yeah. I don't think it would be a replacement at this point, but it is interesting. Anything more about that?
Yeah, it's not the successor to Nikki Haley. Now, the president will be making an announcement about something called E15 gasoline. Current blends of gasoline are typically 10% ethanol. During certain months of the year, Filling stations, service stations are allowed to sell what's called E15. It's a 15% ethanol. The president will direct the EPA today to study whether or not E15, as it's known, can be sold all year long. That would be a big boon to corn producers who produce a lot of corn for ethanol in important states like Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota as well. I also hear that the president will have over to the White House just prior to leaving for Iowa people like Senator Joni Ernst, Senator Chuck Grassley, John Thune, Senator Fisher, and maybe
Dakota,
Senator Sass
Iowa,
as well.
Right,
Yeah.
those states.
Yeah, that whole area where they got all the corn stalks.
Yes, absolutely. Have lived in that area before. Before I let you go, more on Nikki Haley right now. There seemed to be a warmth in the room, jovial.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw something I've actually never seen before. When the president said, "I'll take all your questions," anybody? Anybody? Crickets. What was going on in there?
I mean, he was in a mood to chat, and he eventually.
Yeah, but the reporters had no more questions. They had the president of the United States and Ambassador Haley. I mean, a woman in that position, someone that the president was praising in their presence. Just real quickly, that back and forth, you were in the room. Tell us about it.
I was. Well, I asked 6 or 7 questions, and I didn't want to hog the floor, so I, opened it for some of my other colleagues, and 2 or 3 of them asked questions. But I've never seen the president say any more questions and then heard nothing come out of anybody's mouth. It really was pretty extraordinary.
And correct me if I'm wrong, at one point said to Nikki Haley, he would love to have her back in any capacity she'd want to return.
Yeah, and you talk about there being a warmth in the room. There was one still photograph that I saw on our air in the last hour where it's a face-on of Nikki Haley as she's looking up at the president, and you can see in her eyes that there is a real affection for the president there. The two of them are friends. They haven't always seen eye to eye, but they've always been able to have good conversations with each other. But unless she's a really good actress, I think that she was, there was something in her eyes there that said that she really appreciates this president, and she'll probably miss being at the United Nations. But she's got some other things that she wants to do. She hasn't named it yet, but we'll find out soon.
All right. John Roberts, thank you very much. Always great to get a little extra word from you.
Thanks, Harris.
Okay, so Tom, you just heard John talking about the praise, maybe mutual praise. Nikki Haley actually has a history of praising this particular president. People may not know that so much, but it's true.
That is true. And look, the fact is Nikki Haley is an absolute superstar, and she is going out at the top of her game. She has served in this role as UN ambassador, doing 2 of the most tumultuous, transformative years in U.S. foreign policy. I think she will be very fondly remembered for someone who commanded the respect on the world stage as a forceful and articulate spokesman for U.S. interests. She's someone who I think pushed the president sometimes in a particular direction, and she was always complimentary of him, but even when they disagreed, she was always very forceful but respectful behind the scenes, and I think her fingerprints are all over where U.S. foreign policy is today.
When you look at the high level of departure, if you will, from this president with the ambassador, it's interesting. In the Oval Office, a place where you see heads of state, right? And there she sits, this powerful person at the UN, outgoing.
It's a fascinating moment because it happened, on a day when we thought we were all going to be talking about Kavanaugh being sworn in last night. For the people that I've been talking to in Washington that are close to her, they all say that she's been saying for quite some time that she wanted to be done at the 2-year mark. Remember, she didn't come into this from the Senate. She came in as a governor, where she's the chief executive. And whenever you go into the UN, which is a place that I've long observed, it's sort of like going to the Star Wars intergalactic, assembly, right? All of these languages, all of these people. She's there at a time whenever the administration is unpopular because they're doing a lot of things that they told the voters and the American people that they would do. And she's having to fight on a daily basis on, with the Russians, with the Chinese. I could see how it could be quite daunting after 2 years. But as you said, Tom, she goes out on the highest note possible.
Yeah. Adrian, what kind of bipartisan difference has Ambassador Nikki Haley made in that role? Is it somewhat like when she was governor of South Carolina and she had some great relationships on her team and the other one?
Well, I do think she is certainly one of the most well-respected cabinet members of President Trump's among Democrats in a bipartisan way. She's had to face a lot of really challenging foreign policy issues under the Trump administration, and she's done a very good job of sort of striking that balance of being, representing the president at the UN, but also having to deal with a number of foreign policy issues in that position. For me, I wonder why she's leaving now. Why leave before the midterms? I understand that she's been thinking about this for the last few months.
She's not leaving before the midterms.
Well, she announced, rather, that she's leaving before the midterms. I find that timing to be a little, interesting, but
I
can answer that.
You know what it does do, and I'm curious to know if you agree with this, Dagan. It gives a great set of accomplishments that you can list for Republicans and foreign policy, as Tom was hinting at a time 28 days out, and then we just fill in the blank with that's never a bad timing, it's positive, that sort of thing.
And it also gets ahead of this potentially leaking by any of those gossipy people in Washington. So if they've had private conversations about her making this decision, get ahead of it.
Yeah.
And also it puts out front and center today a role model for all women, somebody who is strong and commanding and fierce and eloquent and elegant at the same time. She has been, when she was criticized, remember earlier this year when she came out and announced that we would impose new sanctions against Russia, that Larry Kudlow, then the new economic advisor, said that she was suffering from momentary confusion. You know what her response was?
That.
With all due respect, I don't get confused. And then she got an apology from Kudlow after that. And she also, in terms of the relationship with the president, she wrote that editorial in the Washington Post in response to that anonymous editorial that was written in the New York Times. And she went, if you don't mind me just reading
Well, you know what?
part of
Let's
it.
do this, because she was also on Fox and Friends. I don't know if you'll remember,
Yes,
right after the
I
UN
do,
General
yeah.
Assembly speech, and she was defending the president. Let's watch that, kind of in the same vein, but we'll let the president be talked about by Nikki Haley.
You've got a president who is nonstop going all the time. The cabinet's just trying to keep up with him. I mean, he's getting things done left and right. How can you honestly think a man who doesn't know what he's doing is getting this much done on jobs, on trade deals, on foreign policy? Look at the stock market. I mean, Americans are living better than they ever have, and you're going to go question his leadership?
She has been out there speaking those kinds of words for the president, and also tough when she felt like she needed to be.
And reading the end of that editorial I was talking about in the Washington Post that Nikki Haley wrote, to Mr. or Ms. Anonymous, I say, step up and help the administration do great things for the country. If you disagree with some policies, make your case directly to the president. If that doesn't work and you're truly bothered by the direction of the administration, then resign on principle. There's no shame in that. Do not stay in your position and secretly undermine the president and the rest of the team. It's cowardly, anti-democratic, and it's a disservice to our country.
So it's interesting, too, Tom, because the president knew about this reportedly, and now we know directly from him 6 months ago. I love it when grown folk can keep a secret. I mean, the nation is depending on that to happen. And apparently the only time that can happen is when it's between the president and Ambassador Nikki Haley. Nothing leaked for 6 months. And that was actually a good thing for this country, because we needed to concentrate on other things.
I totally agree with you. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, the fact that a secret of this magnitude could be kept in Washington, D.C. for so long is extraordinary. And look, the fact is, kind of digging what you were saying, Nikki Haley is a strong, powerful, plain speaker who I think really could communicate, not just with the world audience, but with the people in America about what the president's agenda was and what the United States was trying to accomplish in foreign policy. And so I certainly hope that although she's at least stepping out of her current role, my guess is we have not heard the last from Nikki Haley. I do not think this is the final chapter in the Nikki Haley story, and I very much hope she will remain a vibrant part of our foreign policy
How about this
discussions.
chapter? The New York Times has obtained, the Washington Post has obtained, very different. The Washington Post has obtained the resignation letter from Ambassador Haley. I just want to read a couple of blurbs here. Dear Mr. President, it has been an immense honor to serve our country in your administration. I cannot thank you enough. You will recall that when you offered me the position of U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations in November 2016, I accepted the offer based on some conditions. And those conditions included serving in your cabinet and on the National Security Council and being free to speak my mind on issues of the day. You made those commitments, and you have absolutely kept them all. And she goes on to say, as a businessman, I expect you will appreciate my sense that returning from government to the private sector is not a step down, but a step up, which is interesting, right? Yeah. To give you time to select a replacement and to give the Senate time to consider your selection, I am prepared to continue to serve until January 2019. Your thoughts?
That's a really great point about Senate confirmation, because as we talk about the politics of all of this, of who the president could name, there's a lot of people that are being speculated about that could just never get through the Senate. And I think that's one of the reasons that Rick Grinnell, ambassador to Germany, who has been through Senate confirmation, his name is out there. Dina Powell is also someone's name who we've heard a lot. She was the Deputy National Security Advisor for the first year of the administration, although not a Senate confirmed position. But I have a prediction, Harris. You know, this happened today, it's Tuesday, and guess who's coming to the White House on Thursday for lunch? Kanye.
Okay, she's joking.
Why not?
I was waiting, and Morgan is not a person who speculates, so I'm like, where are we going here? And last word in that resignation letter, I look forward to supporting your reelection as president. Second to the last paragraph, with best wishes and deep gratitude, Nikki Haley. Also extremely interesting, Adrian, as you look at the political spectrum out there, imagine it. Nikki Haley on the campaign trail for Donald J. Trump second term.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she would most certainly be one of his top surrogates, no question.
Well, she didn't campaign for him during 2016. She was critical and supported Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, not President Trump, and she still got that job.
Exactly.
And served admirably.
When all of us were wrapping up our evening last night, this was actually the big story, and continues to be. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh clocked in his first day on the job today. His confirmation is energizing both sides of the political aisle in next month's midterm elections. We'll talk why and how. And more in today's big news about Ambassador Nikki Haley departing as America's top diplomat at the UN, the void she will leave, and her impact on the global stage as the president looks to fill the spot. Stay close. Alert as we cover continued new reaction now to UN Ambassador Nikki Haley's resignation. From world allies and America's foreign policy leaders now we're hearing. Ambassador Haley spoke alongside President Trump a short time ago inside the Oval Office. They reflected on what they believe has been great progress on the global stage.
Look at what has happened in 2 years with the United States on foreign policy. Now, the United States is respected. Countries may not like what we do, but they respect what we do. They know that if we say we're going to do something, we follow it through, and the president proved that, whether it was with the chemical weapons in Syria, whether it's with NATO, saying that other countries have to pay their share. I mean, whether it's the trade deals, which have been amazing. They get that the president means business. The U.S. is strong in a way that should make all Americans very proud.
And here's the president.
When we came into office, it was almost inevitable in the minds of many that we were going to war with North Korea. Iran looked like a real problem. It was a question of when would they take over the Middle East prior to my coming here, and now Iran is fighting for their lives. We've just made a lot of progress on so many other fronts also. And I think the world, as Nikki said, the world is really respecting the United States again.
You heard the president talking about some of the things that the United States is juggling, complex issues with North Korea, Iran, and China. State Department correspondent Rich Edson has more now from the State Department. I would imagine a very electric place this morning.
It is, Harris. You know, the UN Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, caught some folks off guard here this morning. She announced to her staff, many of her staff, according to an official, that she was leaving this morning, then went over to the White House and spoke with the president, and that's the discussion that you just saw there we've been seeing throughout the day. She took over as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations at the beginning of the Trump administration, when plenty of folks in Washington and in capitals around the country and around the world were looking for some guidance as to what the specifics of Trump foreign policy were going to be. She started out working with the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, often speaking on issues before he spoke on issues. She took a very traditional Republican foreign policy line when it came to Russia and on other issues. That transitioned over under Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. They worked together on the pressure campaign to try to get countries around the world, the United Nations Security Council, to cut off North Korea. That effort still continues. In fact, she was just with the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo a couple of months ago up at the United Nations, pushing China and Russia to enforce the sanctions that they said that they agreed to and enacted. Beyond that, though, she was at the middle of U.S. foreign policy at the United Nations. Traditional U.S. allies applauding the United States on the response in Syria to the chemical attack, the pushback against Russia in many places. But she also caught plenty of criticism from especially European American allies when the United States withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. Other issues like cutting off U.S. funding to a Palestinian aid organization at the United Nations, withdrawing the United States from the UN, the Human Rights Council. That's something that the U.S. caught plenty of criticism. And the line from the United States was very much, look, these organizations need reform. The U.S. isn't going to contribute to them. And so she led those efforts at the United Nations, caught the criticism from many traditional American allies, but there's still plenty of work in her office left to do as she's going to stay there through 2018. And a lot of it has to do with North Korea, those sanctions, and keeping all those countries on board applying that pressure while the U.S. negotiates with Kim Jong-un. Back to you.
Great. Thank you very much. That was some great information. Morgan, as we look at this and you listen to Rich's reporting, it really puts in the front view how much has been accomplished, but so much has to be done now. And as Iran's about to potentially, not Iran, boy, that was a slip, wasn't it? North Korea is potentially going to let us see some of those missile sites and inspectors in. We wanted it to be Iran. That didn't work out.
Yeah, a couple of points. You're right, Harris, and a couple of points about how the next UN ambassador will be chosen. What a lot of people don't realize is it's not a cabinet position. The UN ambassador actually reports to Secretary Pompeo. He has it actually technically reports to the Undersecretary of International Affairs, a guy named Ambassador Moley, who's in the job at the moment, but no one knows who that is. That's fine. So Secretary Pompeo clearly has a lot of confidence with the president. They have a good relationship. I expect that he will have a very big role in picking who the next UN ambassador will be, because that person will report to him. When you look at what Nikki Haley was able to accomplish in the Trump administration over the last 2 years, it's going to be difficult to replicate that in the next 2 years, because we're entering a time where we have three major things going on from a foreign policy perspective. One, in 3 weeks, new U.S. sanctions against the Iranian regime will come into place. Dagan will be able to talk extensively about what that may do to the oil market and how that might drive up oil prices. That's going to be an incredibly contentious issue, because as we saw just a few weeks ago, when the president was at the UN, he led the meeting at the UN Security Council on Iran sanctions. That's not to mention North Korea and China. So there's going to be a lot of very unpopular stuff that I think this administration absolutely should be pushing, but it's going to be a slog for anyone who's in that position.
So what's interesting about that too, when you talk about toughness on Iran, it also makes them a bit more dangerous in terms of being desperate, I would think as well. And they are known supporters of terrorism around the world. So, it is something to think about, too, not just the money portion of it.
Right. The #1 state sponsor of terrorism, when we inked that very deal and sent pallets of cash in the middle of the night to Iran as a ransom in part. One thing of note that I'll bring up, our relationship with China has gotten worse and much more tense just in the last couple of days, with Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, exchanging some testy language, some testy words with Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Beijing. And this is right after Vice President Mike Pence just last week outlined a shift in our strategy in dealing with China from engagement to confrontation. We still have, again, a very tough trade fight, but this all wraps into you hammer them on the finances and the trade and their economy, and again, you starve the military complex.
Can I ask you a question about that, though?
Sure.
Is this the first time that China has really seen us act this way? I was reading recently that, we haven't been as tough as we've needed to be, even when the stakes weren't where they are now.
So and to that point, that's absolutely true, and we're getting tough, particularly with the tariffs, saying hey, it's not going to be a free ride in this country. And they selected goods for the initial tariffs. It's about half of what we import from China every year for goods that we can buy from that are made in other nations. So it was very wily. And I just wanted to point out how tough she was and the language that she used on the Human Rights Council as well.
All right. Okay. We owe one to Adrian and Tom, so we'll be back.
Okay.
For right now, though, let's get to this. A new era for the Supreme Court as Justice Brett Kavanaugh begins his day one on the new job with protesting going on outside the High Court. Can the nation move on from the bitterly partisan confirmation process? We'll talk about it.